Player Profiler Posse. I am Hilo, and this is First Mover. We started off our journey in this new installment of First Movers with an exploration of psychology, human psychology, the interaction of human minds in the game of best ball, overarching principles including internal psychology and external or crowd psychology. And we also talked about the aspects of human psychology at play in tight end premium. So we're going to continue kind of along that theme and discuss the aspects of human psychology at play in the SuperFlex format. Interesting discussion for today in that FFPC, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, has a combination of a couple of these formats that we'll have talked about in the SuperFlex Tight End Premium Best Ball Tournament, $35 entry, and that is going to be one that you are not going to want to miss. Awesome format. We'll talk to that here shortly, but before we get into that, we're going to hear from the Podfather himself about our sponsors for today's episode, FFPC.
Hey, people always ask me, what's the World Series of Fantasy? What's the Super Bowl of Fantasy? And it's easy. It's the FFPC. Their signature Players Championship has a $6 million prize pool, and their best ball leagues start in February. And they're the answer to so many questions. Hey, what's the best place to get a Dynasty Orphan? Well, you can adopt a Dynasty Orphan at the FFPC right now. There's more orphans at the FFPC than anywhere else on the internet. That's why we partner with them. So if you want to play fantasy football for low, medium, high stakes, you love Dynasty, you love best ball, you love seasonal leagues, all types of fantasy footballers need to go to the FFPC. And remember, use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you $25 off your first team. Promo code Underworld, $25 off your first team, no matter what the format is, at the FFPC. Go get it.
I know you've heard about the FFPC. If you have not, go check them out. They have awesome leagues over there. And we're going to talk about one of those interesting contests, pretty much in depth, and the human psychology that goes into drafting in that contest today. So that $35 SuperFlex Tight End Premium format. Let's first discuss kind of the overall composition of the contest, the governing rules themselves. You're obviously going to draft in a room of 12 teams, advancing out of your first round, similar to other playoff formats around the industry. 2 out of 12 will advance from each draft, but then we start to see some different breakouts compared to other leagues around the industry. 2 out of 12 are then advancing out of week 15. Week 16, the same thing, 2 out of 12. And then you're lumped into a week 17 contest with only 50 total teams. So that's going to affect, obviously, a lot of our game plan development, but we're going to talk to kind of the psychological aspects first and foremost, because there's really just not a lot of people talking about those things around the industry. So let's dive in. First of all, before we get into this discussion of the psychology at play in tight end premium, let's look at some generalized scoring or scoring production amongst the positions in tight end premium format, as is the case over at FFPC. And we're going to compare quarterback 24, running back 24, wide receiver 24, and then tight end 12, because in this format, we are able to start 2 quarterbacks being tight end or being super flex, but instead of the other contest on FFPC where we have 2 flexes, one of those flex spots is eaten up by the super flex position. So we still have 20 roster spots to make a weekly roster of just 8 positions, one of those being a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 normal flex, and now one SuperFlex. So there's some interesting psychological aspects that come into play simply by the fact that we are no longer required to start 7 running backs, wide receivers, and or tight ends. We are now only required to start 6. Interesting aspects, and that's why we're kind of comparing quarterback 24, running back 24, wide receiver 24, and then only tight end 12 as far as fantasy points per game goes. So let's jump into those numbers. The quarterback 24 in fantasy points per game in the 2022 season put up 15.8 fantasy points per game in this format. The running back 24, again, since we're forced to start 2 of them, put up 12.1 fantasy points per game in this format. The wide receiver 24 put up 13.5 fantasy points per game in this format. And the tight end 12 doesn't even come close. So we're not even going to bring that number up. Suffice to say, as we talked about in a previous episode, the tight end premium format favors volume at the position. And since there are only 4, maybe 5 tight ends that see the requisite volume to actually take advantage of that tight end premium format, the tight end really, it's almost better to be comparing like the tight end 5 in this format to the quarterback 24, the running back 24, the wide receiver 24, because fantasy points per game at the tight end position beyond the elite volume tight ends in this format is so flat. Obviously, there is going to be, and I say flat being tightly, I guess, constrained around the median for season-long scoring. What that means is basically, obviously, we're going to have ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys in single week performance because the tight end position without volume is so heavily tied to touchdowns at the position. So while we're going to see significant ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys at the position on a weekly basis, the season long median projections are very, very close beyond or within a tier beyond those top 5. And we'll talk about that here shortly as well. So right off the bat, the fact that we only need to start 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs plus 1 flex. So again, that super flex position taking over one of the requirements to start running backs or wide receivers primarily. The fact that that is the case, it increases the value of mega spike week potential at those positions, at wide receiver and running back, because we are forced to start fewer at the position. So throwing names at this idea for the wide receiver position, names like Tyler Lockett, Gabe Davis, Mike Evans, all 3 of the Baltimore wide receivers, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Thomas, Jamison Williams, these are names that see an increase in value in this format. And there's particular names in that bunch that are being undervalued in this format. Names like, and those are probably the top 9 rounds in Superflex tight end premium. Once you start, well, Jamison Williams is a little bit past that in ADP. He's about 10.5. Other names that are going even later than that gain increased value in this format are guys like Romeo Dobbs, Nico Collins, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Alec Pierce, Rashid Shaheed is a good one late, Marvin Mims is a good one late, even Darius Slayton is a good one super, super late. Those players, from a fantasy points over expectation perspective, or from the perspective of usable weeks. So fantasy points over expectation is basically the points per game that a player is scoring when they enter your roster over the baseline median projection for that roster position. When we talk about usable weeks, that is how many weeks out of the 17 or yeah, let's just say the 17-week season for these contests that a player would enter your lineup. So guys like Romeo Dobbs, Nico Collins, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Alec Pierce, Rashid Shaheed, Marvin Mims, Darius Slayton, these guys can rival the value output and the usable weeks thresholds of guys like Keenan Allen, Drake London, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman, these guys that are consistent producers but don't necessarily have the high spike week potential. And we're not talking about even 80% outcomes because that is somewhat undervalued in a format like this. We're talking about like 90 to 95% outcomes, which is they should only be expected to hit those thresholds 5 to 10% of the time. But because your Romeo Dobbs and Nico Collins, all those names I mentioned in the first part of that list, because they carry similar per week ceilings to guys like Keenan Allen, Drake London, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman, we can expect them to carry significant value versus their ADP. If you notice, the first part of the list of names that I read out, those are all guys going in the 13th, 14th plus round in this format. Keenan Allen, Drake London, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman. Those guys are all going in the 5th to 8th round in this format. So an interesting, just pure data-based psychological aspect of what the rules of this format, the governing doctrine, how this contest was set up, that not a lot of people are going to think through and really affects our baseline strategy going into drafting these contests. If we continue that thought process, and if we know that mega spike weeks are more valuable, again, 90 to 95% outcome, are now more valuable when compared to a non-SuperFlex format where 80% outcomes are highly, highly valuable, are more valuable because it's more consistent to be able to hit those values. But because we know that the contingent value of late running backs is higher than the contingent value of late wide receivers, just from a blanket statement, and I don't like to use blanket catch-all type statements, but just from a generalized rule, late running backs are going to carry higher contingent value than late wide receivers as a general rule. Also, late quarterbacks enter the discussion in contingent value because of the format, of the SuperFlex format. And this is going to lead to some interesting discussions as far as game plan development goes a little bit down the road that we'll get into as well. But from a generalized rule, late round quarterbacks are going to carry the highest contingent value in this format, followed by late round running backs, followed by late round wide receivers. And while the median projection of late round tight ends is higher than the median projection of late round running backs and late round wide receivers, and we're talking rounds 17 plus. So the final 4 rounds in your draft, the median projection of tight ends in that range is going to be and is definitive statement higher than the median projections of the other positions. But again, because we are only starting one tight end per week, and because we have 20 roster spots, and because super mega spike week potential is basically king in this format because of the reduced size of our general skill position players that we are forced to start each week, they now lose a lot of ground in this game plan development aspect of human psychology in this format. So we'll break this down even further, what this expanded roster size to 20 roster positions. And again, I say expanded versus a format or a content provider like Underdog. The additional 2 roster spots, because we are only starting one tight end, because this format devalues non-volume tight ends. And that's an interesting way to put it, and that's why I phrased it that way for a very particular reason. It's not just that this format increases the value of the top volume players at the position, so the top 5 tight ends or so. It is also that from a relative value standpoint, because as we talked about in a previous episode, the ADPs of the tight ends in this format, in tight end premium, are about 1.5 full rounds earlier than on other sites, so Underdog and DraftKings. And because once we get past tight end 12, that delta in ADP jumps to 2 full rounds. So now we have to consider this idea of relative value. And now, because this SuperFlex tight end premium format simultaneously devalues the non-volume tight ends and it favors mega spike weeks. Let's return our thoughts back to how we opened here, where median projections of tier 3 plus tight ends are going to be relatively flat, is the word we used, but that's all bunched up in a tight distribution. But because those tight ends are going to see ebbs and flows because they are, one, not volume tight ends, and they're, two, reliant on touchdowns, therefore, we're going to see an increase in volume in drafting more tight ends. So an increased importance on drafting more volume at the position in the middle to late and super late rounds. Furthermore, let's talk about Travis Kelce, because obviously he is viewed as the king in this format. His ADP is top 9 currently, and it's basically just Justin Jefferson and a slew of quarterbacks that are going higher than him in these drafts. So let's talk about him. Again, Travis Kelce gives you that consistent production. His median projection on a weekly basis is going to be so much higher than all the other. Basically, it's Travis Kelce and everybody else as far as median projection goes. But if you look at the data from last season, Travis Kelce was the highest scoring tight end on a given week just twice out of 17 weeks last year. And while it is foolish to think that we can completely make up Travis Kelce's production in this format, being Superflex tight end premium, via a slew of other options at the position, because we would have to nail 4 to 5 bodies that exactly lined up and scored touchdowns and potentially multiple touchdowns in alternating weeks. And that is very, very mathematically hard to do. But theoretically, Travis Kelce could be viewed as a borderline full fade in this format. And that's like, Hilo, how are you making that assertion? Travis Kelce is so far and away above the rest of the field at the tight end position, and this is tight end premium. It's like, yeah, if we were forced to start 2 tight ends a week, Travis Kelce could be in the discussion for 1.01. The fact that we are only forced to start 1 tight end, and oh, by the way, it's super flex, where we have a higher median projection out of quarterbacks, 24 to 30, that can basically provide similar median projection over an entire season as Travis Kelce. All of those things come together that Travis Kelce could be thought of theoretically from a theoretical standpoint. And it's very, very hard to make that leap in practice. But he could be viewed as a theoretical entire full fade in this format because of positional scarcity, because of the fact that we now have 20 roster spots to throw volume at the problem and make up or attempt to make up for the dip in production. All these things. The secondary function of that thought process of one, quarterback median projection is going to be higher than any other position. And two, that tight ends, even in a tight end premium format, because of the roster settings, the roster sizes, and the number of each position that we're forced to start on a given week, those two things come together to basically provide a very, very clear roadmap as far as roster construction goes from an optimal theoretical standpoint. We would almost 100% across the board want four quarterbacks, and we would almost 100% across the board want four tight ends. And you can make the argument, the asterisk of we would 100% across the board theoretically want four tight ends on rosters that do not have Travis Kelce because of the discussion of positional scarcity, of all the things that we've already discussed, and why he would theoretically be a borderline full fade in this format. But if we make that leap and take Travis Kelce in the first round, again, over guys like Jamar Chase, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, all names who will provide a higher median projection in positions where we have to start, we are forced to start more of a higher number of per week. With that thought process in mind, and with the theoretical framework that we've discussed over this first 20 minutes, think about some of the value quarterbacks that are available on the board. Think about where some of the tier 4, tier 5 quarterbacks are going because of this format. So it goes almost without question that the top 7 or so quarterbacks. So in this format, Justin Fields is the QB7 being drafted currently, ahead or just behind Justin Herbert. Other places around the industry, those two are flopped, where you see Justin Fields being drafted ahead of Justin Herbert. But either way, they are basically interchangeable across the industry as the quarterback 6 and quarterback 7. So the top 7 quarterbacks should theoretically be the top 7 draft picks in this format. Why is that? That is due to quarterbacks are going to provide both the highest median projection on a per week basis as well as an entire season. And they give you the best or the highest frequency of mega spike week performances. And it's really these top 7 quarterbacks are going to provide about 80% of those mega spike weeks in the coming season per projections. So if that's the case, that is again another nod to Travis Kelce, who is being drafted before some of those quarterbacks. That is a nod to, even in this particular FFPC SuperFlex tight end premium, the $35 tournament over there, we see Justin Jefferson being drafted ahead of Justin Fields and Justin Herbert. That is a theoretical mistake. When you compare that to other sites that are offering Superflex around the industry, Justin Jefferson is being drafted after Justin Herbert and Justin Fields. A whole lot of Justins going on here, man. So right off the bat, we could consider, unless Justin Jefferson falls, we have Travis Kelce and we have Justin Jefferson going in the first round that could be considered borderline full fades unless they fall behind those top 7 quarterbacks. And that is just theoretics plus data. So that's analytical and theoretical thought process combined. But if we again return our attention to these tier 3 and 4 quarterbacks, or even a little bit beyond that, tier 4 and tier 5, we start to get to guys like Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy. These quarterbacks are kind of in no man's land as ADP goes because we still have wide receivers and running backs that have RB1 and wide receiver one, or top 12 at their respective position within their range of outcomes from a season long projection. It would be borderline impossible, extremely improbable for either Kyler Murray or Brock Purdy to finish in the top 12 of the position this season. So they're kind of in this no man's land as far as ADP goes. So here are a couple more names that are theoretical borderline full fades. So we're starting to see these pieces add up, all coming from the psychology and the theoretical components of drafting this format. We're starting to see this breadcrumb approach that is bringing us to the theoretical optimal way to approach these contests. So I keep harping on, and I keep saying throughout our exploration in these episodes, theoretical optimal versus actual or in practice, how we would approach these contests. And those are two very different things. But if you're interested to learn more about the differences between theoretics and conceptual intricacies of drafting these various contests, I invite you to head on over to oneweekseason.com. Check out the Best Ball Plus product. We designed that product to mirror 90, 30 to 60 minute one-on-one training sessions. You think about the value of getting a one-on-one sit down for somewhere between 45 to 90 hours and the cost that that would incur. This product is unlike anything out there. It will train you to think theoretically, analytically, and conceptually, and merge those different three pillars of best ball to train your decision-making process to be a more profitable best ball player. We are not telling you who to draft. We are not telling you when to draft them. We are explaining why and how we draft and training you to do so through these 90, 30 to 60 minute one-on-one training sessions. So head on over to oneweekseason.com. Check out the Best Ball Plus product on sale for the rest of this off season for just $149. But wait, use promo code HILOW, HILOW. That'll get you to nice, juicy 20% off that product. Again, head on over to oneweekseason.com. Check out the Best Ball Plus package. So continuing on our discussion, if we know that the median projection for QB24 is going to be so much higher than the RB24, than the wide receiver 24, and then the tight end 12, again, the quarterback 24, because we can start two quarterbacks, the RB24, because we're forced to start two, the wide receiver 24, because we're forced to start two, and the tight end 12, because we're only forced to start one. Guys like Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill, even potentially the quarterback situation in Tampa Bay, these guys should be considered as extreme values in this format. They offer the combination of cheap cost of acquisition, uncertainty surrounding role and or health, which gives us that depressed ADP, and their relative likelihood to finish the season in the top 24 in points per game at the quarterback position. Those quarterbacks are going around the 7-8 turn in this format with the Tampa Bay quarterbacks, both of them. We're going to lump them together because there is even more amounts of ambiguity associated with that situation. But if you think theoretically, how do we handle ambiguity? As we've discussed previously, the field is generally looking at ambiguous situations from a binary approach. I have to pick one or the other, and I am throwing my money on that situation. It's like, no, man, you can draft both of them on a roster in this format with 20 roster spots. take your shots on Baker Mayfield plus Kyle Trask. You've basically locked up a starting quarterback for 17 weeks at an extremely depressed price, and or mix and match them throughout a portfolio in these contests. Those players carry value in this format. And if you think to earlier where I said theoretically we would want 4 quarterbacks on every roster based on the starting roster requirements and the amount of roster spots that we have. So again, 2 starting quarterbacks on every week, and we have total 20 roster spots. That does not preclude you from taking up 2 of those roster spots with like the combination of Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. That is not against being theoretical optimal. I would argue because of the cost of acquisition, we should be going out of our way to target that situation. We should be going out of our way. If I had it my way, I would have one of Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask on every single roster I draft in this format. They're being drafted as the last starting quarterbacks. Is it? I would say I'll pose it like this. If someone were setting odds on Tampa Bay quarterback, and we'll just use it as a singular position. If someone were posting odds on Tampa Bay quarterback finishing top 12 or top 24, in fantasy points per game this season, with a declining defense and everything that's going on in Tampa Bay, what would those odds be set at? And how would that compare to other quarterbacks that are being drafted much, much earlier? How would that compare to Mac Jones? Would it be even money? If it is even money, then that's a plus EV bet because their ADP discrepancy is so large. So again, yeah, I'm putting my high-low name on like drafting Tampa Bay quarterbacks in SuperFlex tight end premium. What are you talking about, dude? But that is the theoretics behind that assertion. Jimmy G opened camp with no restrictions to start camp. We know that there were all these rumblings going on through even OTAs that there was a contingent factor in his contract this season over the next 2 years that said they could basically cut ties if he didn't pass his physical. And that sunk his ADP all the way down to basically the back end of starters being drafted. What has happened is now that he has started camp with no restrictions, he's still hanging out at the same ADP. It is not adjusted yet. So that is just expected value, and that is just leverage staring us in the face. Similar story for Ryan Tannehill. The ambiguity associated with Ryan Tannehill is not necessarily strictly tied to health. It's a little bit more closely tied to, do we expect him to be starting, or how long into the season do we expect him to be starting because they added a rookie in the NFL draft. Due to the Tennessee Titans' actions this offseason, even though their first 6 games, they are underdogs. In every single game of their first 6 games of the NFL season, they are still underdogs after the signing of DeAndre Hopkins. Even with all of that, knowing that coaching staff, knowing how they get the most out of every player on that roster, I expect Ryan Tannehill to start for as long as Tennessee are within striking distance in their division. But guess what? It is the weakest division in the NFL. Now add in the fact that there's an expanded position in the playoffs out of each conference, an additional wild card spot. Yeah, Ryan Tannehill could be starting the entire season. He's not being drafted as such because there's that uncertainty, but that just gives us inherent leverage. And we don't have to do anything other than click his name every now and then. That's pretty easy to do at his ADP, right? So those 3 situations in particular, because of the scoring format, because of the roster requirements, because of the psychological aspects associated with those teams, the ambiguity associated with those situations, no one wants to click those names. But those names are extremely valuable in this format. What about backup quarterbacks? And I mentioned that every roster that we draft in this contest would theoretically carry 4 quarterbacks. After that, you're talking about diminishing returns, you're talking about limiting the upside of the other positions, but from a theoretical standpoint, every roster entered in these contests would have 4 quarterbacks. Does that mean those 4 quarterbacks must be NFL starters at this point in time in July on their respective team depth chart? No. That's where we get value. That's where we get leverage. Or that's one way, I should say. So where are some other like ambiguous situations as far as whether it's related to health or whether it's related to um, the starter remaining the starter deep into the season? Well, we talked about one in Tennessee. What about some other ones? What about Colt McCoy in Arizona? Who would be an interesting pairing partner with Colt McCoy? Well, we know that Ron Rivera, head coach of the Washington Commanders, has rotated through quarterbacks within a season faster than a turnstile spins in New York. Interesting pairing to make up like a quarterback 3 production or expected or projected or median production. Colt McCoy plus Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett is not starting the NFL season or not expected to as at atop the depth chart there. But Colt McCoy is probably, or I don't know, I won't say probably, but could start the season as the starter in Arizona. The combination of those two is an interesting leveraged way to kind of piecemeal this quarterback 3 on a roster together. We talked about Kyle Trask. We talked about the ambiguity in Tampa. But Kyle Trask is a betting favorite to start a game at some point this season. Gardner Minshew? There's all kinds of ambiguity associated with the Indianapolis quarterback situation. Once Anthony Richardson was taken at 4th overall by the Indianapolis Colts, it was assumed and it was backed up by coach speak and by owner speak and by GM speak that he was going to enter the season as the starter. It stayed the same through OTAs. Gardner Minshew was splitting time with Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson from beat reporters was hailed as the starter entering the season. Now they get to camp, and it's like Gardner Minshew is taking the first team reps. And the owner comes out and says, hey, we might start Gardner Minshew for the first 8 games of the season and then reassess. There's a whole lot of ambiguity to leverage there. What about Brian Hoyer? We talked about the best case scenario for Jimmy Garoppolo, that he's fine and everything's good to go. This is still a later age quarterback. And we have a fairly cut and dry backup situation with Brian Hoyer expected to be the quarterback 2 in Las Vegas. What happens if Josh Jacobs doesn't come back? What happens if Devontae Adams requests a trade mid-season? Is Jimmy Garoppolo going to maintain that starting role after they just basically shit can Derek Carr while the season was still going? They're just like, yeah, I know. Sorry, dude, we're out of it, and you're not going to start. You're not going to play at all these final 2 games. Could that not be the case again with Jimmy Garoppolo, who's a lesser quarterback? Yeah, probably could. One of my favorite late round quarterbacks, and this is like deep diving. One of my favorite late round quarterbacks from a leveraged perspective, leveraging the psychology associated with this format that the field is completely overlooking, is Easton Stick for the Chargers. We have a bona fide top 5 offense on paper in practice. No matter which way you slice it, this is a bona fide top 5 offense in Los Angeles on the Chargers. we have a situation where the team went out of their way to bring back Easton Stick, who has basically been a clipboard holder for his entire career. They bring him back very deliberately to back up Justin Herbert. He's going undrafted in most of these drafts. In SuperFlex TE Premium, he's going undrafted. The backup quarterback on a top 5 offense is going undrafted most of the time in this format. That's probably a guy who's going to be on a ton of my rosters in this contest. So the fact that contingent value of late round picks in this format, again, per the scoring, per the roster requirements, per the overall number of roster spots that we have, is highest at the quarterback position due to human psychology and the uncertainty associated with some of the situations around the league. Those players that we should be targeting because of that high contingent value are either undervalued for the starters, backups, sometimes not even drafted. Take advantage. It's time to get weird at quarterback in this contest. Take the late shots. While we're talking about getting weird, it's weird to me on the same team that the backup running back for, again, a top 5 offense is often not drafted. Joshua Kelce, man, he's either drafted in the 20th round or he's not touched. What happens if Justin Herbert gets hurt? Easton Stick. What happens if Austin Eckler gets hurt? Joshua Kelce. Draft these players, man. Their upside is immense. People are not touching them because of the ambiguity associated with it, but we have to realize where the contingent value comes at a higher rate. Where is the ceiling? And those players are more valuable, again, more valuable in this format because it weights mega spike week production heavier than in other contests around the industry. Take advantage. So without dragging this on too long, we're coming up on 45 minutes already. Without dragging this on too long, that provides a very, very clear roadmap of how we should be theoretically optimizing our draft strategy in this contest. You draw a top 7 draft spot, you're taking one of the top 7 quarterbacks. You're bypassing Justin Jefferson to do so. You're bypassing Travis Kelce to do so because the ADP is as it is in this format. If you draw a late pick, so 8 through 12, your first round pick should be Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Austin Eckler, Travis Kelce. That is where we get our exposure to those players because their range of outcomes is higher than the quarterbacks being drafted in that range. So the bottom end tier 2 quarterbacks, the tier 3 quarterbacks that are all being drafted ahead of some of these guys. Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp are middle of the second round picks in this format. So we don't even have to draft Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp at picks 8 to 12. We can wait until the come around because their spike week potential, and again, mega spike week potential, is so much greater than the bottom tier 2 and the tier 3 quarterbacks in that range. And that is just from pure mathematics, analytics. We even need to talk about theory to make that statement. So the quarterbacks that we're bypassing to draft Cooper Kupp, Austin Eckler, Tyreek Hill, they are your Trevor Lawrence, your Deshaun Watson, your Tua Tagovailoa, your Dak Prescott. Take the higher ceiling because it is more valuable to your roster. Don't get sucked into this tight end premium super flex mindset that I must draft tight ends early. It doesn't matter what their range of outcomes is, but I need to get mine right now. Same thing at quarterback. The median projection in this format for Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Austin Eckler, Travis Kelce is higher then the quarterbacks in that range. Again, the low end tier 2 and the tier 3 quarterbacks. And in this format, we can nab 2 of them at that 1-2 turn. We can nab almost every draft I have seen or been a part of in this format. And again, this goes into the theoretical component of field observations and making assumptions based on those observations. But from my observations, you can get 2 of Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Austin Eckler, Travis Kelce, CMC, you can throw him in there as well. You can get 2 of those guys from picks 8 to 12. Almost unanimously across the board, every draft I have seen or been a part of. But the field is saying, I'm scared, I need a quarterback, and I want a tight end early because it's tight end premium. Don't fall into that psychological trap. You're generating leverage simply by drafting the higher median projected player. Take that. That's just money in your pocket. That's expected value right to the bank. Don't be afraid of having Matthew Stafford's and Ryan Tannehill's and Jimmy Garoppolo's and Russell Wilson's. You get 3 of those 4 guys in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, your median projection is higher than if you burn one of those early picks on Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, Tua Tagovailoa, Dak Prescott. The only player in that tier 2, tier 3 quarterback range that I would make an exception for is Tua, because this format values mega spike week at the position. And because he just brings elite per week upside to the table. So there are your psychological aspects at play in the SuperFlex tight end premium format. Again, shouts to FFPC. That new $35 SuperFlex tight end premium format best ball tournament is outstanding. Go draft on FFPC. Some of the lowest rake you'll see around the industry. Take advantage. Lower rake is going to increase your expected value over in a portfolio. So take advantage of the reduced rate. Go draft on FFPC. I am Hilo, and this was First Mover.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.